Caw. It's another DADCAW. It's the 5th of March, 2021, and we are starting this month off with one of these vlogs. Obviously, it is 10:37 in the morning. I say obviously because you should know that. And what day is the 5th of March again? It's Friday, because 5th and Friday both start with F, and the third F can be in the chat, because 3. And now we get into the topic of this particular video, which is another angle on self-improvement and self-education. The main reason why I wanted to touch on self-education versus self-improvement in the title is because, well, obviously I've made a ton of self-improvement vlogs in general, but the education thing for me is obviously the biggest part, because we talked about process over product. That was obviously one of the more recent, well, I think the previous by design video, even though it was like a year plus old by now, most likely, that video is very well articulated in terms of how I lay out the case for why you should focus mostly on your process so that you can continue to create products. And there's many different layers we could go into that, and we could sort of thread the needle and work out some more context there, and maybe have a more deep conversation about that kind of thing. But the main sort of takeaway from that is when you're improving your process, you're essentially educating yourself. You're increasing your standards. You're allowing yourself to have more skills and learn more things. All these things are very important coming into trying to improve yourself. You must educate yourself first so that you can level yourself up in that respect. And another angle to self-education for me is trying to find some sort of mastery in a completely, seemingly unrelated field of study. For example, most recently I've been doing this casting stuff, and that has taught me a lot of lessons that I would never have learned if I had continued to just make videos and maps and games and whatever else that I was doing, and talk shows even. Obviously, I'm juggling a ton of different things in terms of the acts of putting that stuff together. It's very different, right? And one of the things that I've noticed in general is whenever I learn some new skill, be it broadcasting as a commentator, be it making talk shows, be it working on a map in StarCraft, whenever I learn something new, it almost always has some applicable value to whatever else I happen to be doing. All of my other hobbies or crafts, all of my other jobs, everything else can benefit in some way from some mindset that I bring or take out of this new work, and maybe even some specific thing like looking into the camera when you're doing a video segment, which I was very bad at doing in the past, and I'm not 100%, batting average in that particular respect now either, but it's getting better. It's getting much, much better. And when you see that, and when you see the difference that it makes in the videos, it's not because I looked at the camera like for 1 minute out of a video and thought, wow, that looks way better. I should do that all the time. It's because when I was studying broadcasting, when I was learning to become a commentator, that was something that was pointed out to me, that if you look at the camera, it's much, much better than if you don't look at the camera. And you shouldn't pick at your face like, oh yeah, caress your own beard. You shouldn't take a sip of water in the middle of your broadcast. You shouldn't do any of that stuff because it doesn't work out. And just like you shouldn't interrupt your broadcast to say like, comment, and subscribe, homies, because that's just rude, right? That's just counter to what you would expect out of a proper broadcast. And thankfully, this isn't a proper broadcast, so none of that stuff even matters. You certainly shouldn't leave your calendar up there either to fuck with the white spacing of your background. There's all these different things that you learn, right? And obviously, I'm sort of presenting these in jest, but the fact that I was able to level up my videos off the back of learning how to make proper broadcast in a commentator's role is not something that follows logically necessarily until you actually do it. So if you happen to be somebody who's maybe struggling to improve in a certain area, and you have a bunch of other hobbies that you haven't taken super seriously, or you've had some aspirations to learn into a hobby. Say you're a programmer and you're like, well, maybe I should go get into like 3D modeling or whatever, but that seems really tough, or vice versa. Maybe you're more of a creative and you're like, oh, I could never do something like programming. That sounds so ridiculous. What I'm just saying is if you take on some of these challenging occupations or hobbies or crafts, you might be able to take something, odds are you will be able to take something out of that craft and apply it to everything else that you also enjoy doing and level up the overall quality of everything. And then if you can be conscious of what you're taking from one craft to another and reverse engineer how you came to that conclusion, or figure out what that brings to the craft that previously was absent without that mechanic, or changing some behavior that then levels up the broadcast of some respect, like what exactly exactly is that? What does that look like? And why did that happen? If you can start to figure out that pattern recognition, you'll be on track to shortcut a lot of the different things that normally take a long time of trial and error and figuring stuff out. If you can just figure out what works and why stuff that works, that's going to give you a huge leg up in general and will certainly help you out in the future. So that's my other angle to self-education, right? It's education by doing a lot of different things. It's education for video making by becoming a commentator. And yeah, sure, not everybody's going to have the opportunities, the source network, the connections, the skills perhaps, or the dedication to make all of these different things happen. I'm certainly using some very strange cases to make my point. However, I would argue that no matter where you are, no matter what your level of competence is, there's probably at least 10 different things that you could do by virtue of, I mean, it's way more than that, but by virtue of just being connected to the internet, you should be able to get into multiple different hobbies. And if you've ever had aspirations to do video editing or music making or literally anything creative or maybe intense in some other respect, like people wouldn't necessarily think of programming as creative, but obviously it requires a lot of study. And I would argue it is creative, generally speaking, but only in certain circumstances, perhaps. So if you have any situation where there's like some hobby that's been, certainly something you want to explore, I 100% urge you to explore it, not because you'll necessarily become the best possible at it, but because just by learning something to a high level of skill and mastery, you're going to be able to apply lessons from that craft that you just picked up to all of the other hobbies and crafts and jobs that you do elsewhere. And it will just improve you as a human being, thus also improving your process. And that is the main lesson for today. That is today's DADCAW. Hope you enjoyed. Caw.